I want to start this video off by saying that if you're not a fan of open world games in particular, I still think you should give Rebirth either a playthrough or even a whole watch, especially if you've been on the fence after playing the first game. Throughout my entire playthrough, I never found myself being bored or tired of the open world aspect of the game whatsoever, but this is a little biased since I do typically like open world games. Now with that out of the way, I'll be going over my thoughts and give my spoiler-free review of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. So the story in Rebirth is a direct continuation of the things that unfolded in Midgar after the first game. Everything that occurred during this game was all super satisfying to see unravel as you're playing through. The main story and even the side stories are all super enjoyable. There was never a time where I felt myself getting bored while playing this game. And the writing is really enjoyable and everything feels very cohesive. The only downside, in my opinion, is that the story technically isn't completed since there's still a third game that's going to be released sometime in the future, but for this game, it was really well done. And the pacing is done really well, and I got attached to the characters even more compared to the first game since there was more of a backstory and more development that you see between all of the party members in the game. After having played through this, it makes me excited for the third game to see the conclusion of the plot as well. Now, since I played Remake Part 1 back around the time when it first launched, in 2020 I believe, I'm really glad to see that they kept expanding upon the core gameplay mechanics and refining it even more in Rebirth. It already felt really fun and fluid to play, but with the added mechanics of the synergy abilities and some added aerial combat things, it all feels super fluid and amazing to play. The way the synergy abilities work is after 2 of the party members use at least 3 of their specific skills or spells, it'll fill up the synergy gauge and allow them to then use the synergy ability, and depending on the one that you've unlocked, they'll have different effects, such as like unlimited mana or increasing the limit gauge, things like that. There are core skills that you can expand upon, sort of like a skill tree once you level up your weapons for the party and as well Cloud. You're also still able to do some things as you were in the first game, like slotting specific materia onto your weapons and armor to fit the way that you want to play, and this works for every single party member as well, not just Cloud. Now there are some difficulties you can select upon starting the game, those being easy, normal, or dynamic, and technically hard, but that's only after you've beaten the game, similar to Remake Part 1. I played on dynamic, which basically meant that the enemies will scale according to you. So a majority of my playthrough, since I was doing everything offered to me, I ended up being higher level than the recommended level, but it didn't matter since the enemies still scaled towards my level. A large majority of the game isn't necessarily hard, but it's challenging enough where you may come close to wiping and having to restart, or even restarting a few times for some fights here and there. Since this game is more open world rather than just linear level design, you're given the freedom to straight up skip the side content if you choose, or you can do all of it before touching any of the main story. It's really just up to your playstyle and how you want to play. I won't say which areas and stuff you play throughout the game, but in my experience they were all fun to just traverse around and clear all the side content and just really enjoyable. The character and enemy designs are your classic Final Fantasy-esque designs between normal humans, monsters, demons, things of that sort. And of course there are those divine entities that most people are familiar with in the Final Fantasy series. Now there's a bunch of side content you're able to do in this game, with the main one being Queen's Blood, which is a card game that you can play during the main story and just when you're exploring throughout every region. If you're the type of player that doesn't usually do side content in games, the only thing I would highly recommend you to do in Rebirth if you do play are the ones that are tied to every region behind the Proto-Relic name, since the result of doing that is super cool and I highly recommend doing that one. Outside of that, there were so many minigames throughout the game that I don't even know how many there were in total, and I enjoyed all of them except for one specific one that I actually disliked so much it almost made me want to not clear that specific side quest, but that's just my personal opinion. I'm sure people out there might like that minigame. Similar to the first game, you can also do the combat simulations, which is what the gameplay on screen has been this whole time. And in typical Final Fantasy fashion, the music is stellar and very orchestral, just very nice to listen to in and even outside of the game. There's a huge variety of music for almost every encounter, whether it's a main story quest, side quest, even a minigame, or while you're just exploring every region. It was very refreshing to hear all the music play while playing. Overall, if you were for some reason on the fence on buying Rebirth, I highly recommend playing this game. Even if you're not really a fan of open world games, I think you might enjoy this one. By the end of my playthrough, I clocked in around 92 hours and will still play more, finishing some of the post-game things that I haven't cleared yet. If you don't have a PS5 and are waiting for the game to come out on PC, that is totally understandable, and I hope my thoughts and opinions can keep you excited for when that day does come. As for what I thought was done well in this game, it would have to be the variety and the amount of content there is to do in this game, the story, even though it's technically unfinished until the next game that comes out, the gameplay with how fun and fluid it felt, the music being amazing throughout the entirety of the game. There were no bugs or crashes in my experience. And of course there are some flaws too, in my opinion, which are the fact that it's a PS5 exclusive, so non-PS5 havers can't play this game yet until Square Enix decides to bring this to PC. The PS5 limitations, basically the game was only playable on performance mode and not the graphical mode unless you wanted to play a game that would run worse than Bloodborne with less than 30 FPS, but the performance mode still looked decent, just not up to par with how it would look and run on PC, for example. And the loads. While this one is very minor and not the sort of loading you're thinking of, basically, whenever you finish exploring the open world or cleared a side quest, for example, you were stuck. You couldn't move for around 5 to 10 seconds until the quest cleared pop-up went away. And it felt a little bad with like the flow of when you were finishing up a quest or exploring, especially with how often it happens in the game. And so that brings my review to an end. And I really did enjoy every moment in Rebirth despite some of its flaws, and I can't wait until the third game gets announced and released sometime in the future. Hopefully you were able to enjoy this spoiler-free review of mine of FF7 Rebirth. If there's any feedback, make sure to leave a comment and I'll make sure to read it. And as always, if you'd like to watch me stream any of my playthroughs, I do stream on Twitch. Currently I'm playing through Silent Hill 2 Remake, so once I finish that, make sure to look forward for a review of that game as well. Peace.